I have the distinct honor of welcoming our next speaker, Celina Stewart, and draw your attention to these cards that have been passed around too. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Celina Stewart is the Chief Executive Officer of the League of Women Voters. She leads the century-strong voting rights organization in its mission to empower voters and defend democracy. We need her, and we need her right now. She oversees the League's operations, resources, and strategy in this defining moment for American democracy. Celina also launched Unite and Rise 8.5, an ambitious campaign to mobilize 8.5 million voters and assert the League's role as a backbone organization for nonviolent civic action and defense of our democracy. Again, if you want to learn more, find out how to join in that effort, that's what this card is for. Her leadership emphasizes racial equity, organizational culture, and the need to modernize civic engagement for the current era. Celina joined the League in 2018 as Director of Advocacy and Litigation. In that role, and later as Senior Director and Chief Counsel, wow, she developed a nationally recognized legal advocacy program. She was the architect of the People-Powered Fair Maps redistricting campaign and One Person, One Vote, a long-term campaign to end the Electoral College. Please join me in welcoming our next speaker.
Yeah, I'll take that. Shut that off first. I need to get mic'd. 1 second.
Thank you, bro. All
right.
Hello? Oh, you can hear me. It's okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Or can I just put it here?
Yeah, that's what
I'm trying not to move.
Don't step too far away.
Try not to. Stay right here. So first and foremost, thank you so much for having me today. It's truly an honor to be back. I was here in 2024, so I'm very excited to be back. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge something that I think is really important, which is anytime we're in spaces like this, spaces centered around leadership, justice, civic participation, and possibility, we are participating in a tradition much larger than ourselves. We're participating in a tradition built by people who believe that democracy only works when ordinary people decide to stand up for it. That's the belief that brought me here today, and honestly, it's what's guided my entire life. Because before I became this fancy CEO, long before I was even a voting rights attorney, and long before I stood at podiums like this, I was a young Black girl learning how and what it meant to belong in spaces that were not always built for me. And if I'm honest, I think my journey into this work really started with the question: who gets to participate, who gets to belong, but more importantly, who gets left out of the equation? I grew up really seeing examples of civic engagement, even though I didn't have quite the language for what it meant. It just meant my mom dragging me to events, holding up some sign that I couldn't even read most times, because I was so little. But it was a big thing. My dad served in the Air Force during the Vietnam War. My mom grew up navigating segregation in Virginia. She was somewhat of a prodigy, starting college at 15, but having to integrate schools when she was pretty little. So conversations about fairness, power, justice, and equality, that was not abstract in my home. That was really personal, deeply personal conversations that they had. And from a very young age, I was deeply aware that system shapes people's lives. And so I knew very early that I wanted to become an attorney. I was like 8. I was like, Mom, I'm going to be an attorney. And she was like, do you even know what that means? And I was like, yes, I'm going to fight. And by 12, I knew I wanted to go to Spelman College. Now, I think sometimes people think it's funny how I came to this, but it was because of the Cosby Show. Yes. Claire Huxtable, I was like, she's so dope. And so, but I joke about that, but that was like an example of seeing a Black family thrive. And it was on TV every week. And so you had all of these different things. And my parents actually tried some of these exercises where they took stuff out of our room and made us pay for it. I was like, what are y'all doing? But it reminded me of my family in a lot of ways. But that representation really matters because it helps us expand our understanding of what is possible. But other things shaped me too. I grew up in environments where Black excellence was actually normalized. I went to an all-Black middle school, an all-Black magnet high school. in Maryland. And so I attended schools where students looked like me and achievement was expected and leadership was nurtured. And I didn't realize what a gift that was until I stepped outside of it. So initially when I went to college, I went to a predominantly white school before I transferred to Spelman. So I went to, Spelman is very black. But before that, I got an academic and basketball scholarship. I was a ball player. And I went to Pace University. So when I got there, I realized the historically white institution, it was so different than how I grew up because I had always been around people who looked like me. And so that experience stretched me and taught me in a lot of ways, but it also forced me to confront this feeling like you're moving through spaces where you're not represented and your voice is not always heard. Until I met this one professor at Pace, and she changed my life. She asked me, "Is this where you really want to be?" And I was like, "No, girl. I want to go to Spelman." And she knew somebody there, so she picked up the phone and she called someone that she knew, and she got me into Spelman. She transferred me to Spelman. And one of the reasons why my parents didn't want me to go is because Spelman didn't offer me a full ride like Pace did. And so she helped me transfer, but more importantly, she changed the trajectory of my life in that moment because she heard me in that moment of what I really wanted. And she didn't just encourage me, but she helped me achieve it. So that experience taught me something that I carry with myself now. Sometimes leadership looks like opening doors. Sometimes it looks like seeing potential in someone that they haven't quite realized even in themselves yet. And sometimes it looks like just refusing to let people settle for spaces that dim their light. And when I arrived at Spelman, something kind of clicked. I was like, oh my God, I'm home. It was like, the boys were nice. But I was just like, it just feels like home. And so that's where I really began to understand the connection between having a voice and exercising power. And one of my earliest organizing lessons was when I got to Spelman. So Spelman is in Atlanta, Georgia. And anyone who knows Georgia, you know that the food is different, right? So I go to Spelman, and what I did not say so far is that I was a vegetarian when I went to Spelman. Yes, so some people know exactly why this is funny. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to help everyone come along. But I became a vegetarian at 11 after being indoors for a school. In Maryland, when it rains, you stay inside. You can't go outside and play in the rain. And they make you watch these movies. And I saw Charlotte's Web, and it was the first time that I connected the farm with what we ate. And when I went home, I was like, hell no. I ain't eating that anymore. So I became a vegetarian. But when I went to Spelman, I realized that the options were very limited. So I would go up to the counter, and they would have collard greens, and it was cooked in meat. And I said, ma'am, do you have a vegetarian option? I don't eat meat. She's like, oh, girl, just take this meat out. I said, oh, no. That's actually not how this works. So I had to advocate. I had to start a petition. I organized students. I was going to there were block parties back then, but we were going to house parties. I had a petition in my hand saying, can you sign this? I need to eat. And I got enough signatures to meet with the administration, where another professor helped me meet with the administration and advocate for myself so that we could get fresh fruit from the DeKalb Farmers Market, which was a nearby market, a huge market in Atlanta, or outside of Atlanta, that brought in fresh food so that everything that I ate was fresher than what we had. Because all I had was a salad bar. And salads are great, but after a couple of weeks, you get tired of tomatoes, lettuce, and cucumbers. But that feeling of going to the administration really transformed me because it let me know that when you exercise your power and your voice, sometimes there are outcomes that actually push you forward and propel you forward. So it really made me realize how important civic participation is. And it's not just, when I fast forward to now, it's not just about voting. It's not just about elections, even though that is core to what we do every day. It's the belief that ordinary people have the power to shape the conditions of their lives. And that belief eventually led me to law school. And in law school, I discovered voting rights. So I remember sitting in Con Law 1 and Con Law 2. And the cases would make me so angry. I was pissed when I left class. Because I was like, why would the court think that way? Why don't they understand the underlying issues going on in these cases? And I would call my mom, who was so sweet. She was so excited that I had realized this dream of going to law school. And every day I would call her, every Wednesday and Friday I would call her upset. I was like, I hate this. And And she said, what do you mean? I said, how could the court decide this? And I would tell her about all these cases. So she learned a lot. But I would tell her about all these cases that I was listening to. And my mom's a Southern, demure person, very different than me. But she was sipping her little tea and she said, well, I guess you know what type of law you want to practice. And I said, are you crazy? I'm going to have a heart attack doing this work. I'll never do this for a living. But she wasn't wrong. I found out she was right. It was exactly the work that stirred me in a way that I knew and realized that that's where I was supposed to go. But that was like not a hard way, but an interesting way for the universe to kind of push me towards what I was supposed to do. So when I realized that, what moved me to this idea was that democracy needs to belong to everyone. Not just the wealthy, not just the powerful, not just the connected. It belongs to everyone. And so that ultimately led me to the League of Women Voters. And I will say that the League of Women Voters has a slightly complicated history. And I say that because I think it's important to tell the story, no matter what the story is. And it's not to evoke shame, but to claim power. Because self-awareness disarms the past and puts the future back in your hands. And so the same is true, I think, about institutions. The League was founded in 1920 during the women's suffrage movement. But Black women, despite organizing, marching, advocating, and fighting for the right to vote, they were excluded from many places that were supposed to represent women. And that history matters. Because institutions, I think the moral of the story is that institutions do not become inclusive automatically. They become inclusive when people pushed and forced them to. So when I became CEO, I understood the significance of that moment very clearly. Because more than a century after the organization's founding, as a Black woman, I was now leading it. And that's not just symbolic. To me, it represents transformation, and it represents progress. And it represents also a responsibility that you hold in leading this organization, being that you look so different than the members who you are moving to do something. And so because leadership is not all about, to me, the seat at the table, but who you invite to sit down once you're there. So today, the League is one of the largest grassroots voting rights organizations in the country. We have more than 800 local leagues. It's like herding cats. More than 1 million members and supporters nationwide, and we work every day to educate voters, get people to participate, and protect voting rights in ways that will ultimately strengthen democracy. We are nonpartisan, but we ain't neutral about democracy. We're not. We push the lines and the boundaries of what is acceptable and what nonpartisan looks like. In our view, once you become an elected official, you are held accountable to the people. And so we will do what we have to do to push people to make sure that people have representation, that people are accountable to the people. So right now, I think we're seeing a lot of attacks, which I think can be can weigh a lot on people. We see attacks on voter registration, we see restrictions to voter access, and we see extreme gerrymandering happen around the country. Mm-hmm. And more than anything, we see disinformation happening. People just sharing things, whether it's AI generated, I know that came up earlier, or just people posting things that they may know are not true. And so as we think about these efforts, it's really an effort to concentrate power in ways that weaken democratic accountability. As someone who has spent their lives doing voting rights work, I can honestly tell you that this is not accidental. It's not incidental. These are deliberate efforts to limit participation, who has right to the ballot. Mm-hmm. So that is why our legal work matters, I think, so deeply right now, because many people may not realize this, but 8 years ago when I joined, as the lovely young lady mentioned, I was hired as Senior Director or Director of Advocacy and Litigation to launch what they thought could be possibly a litigation practice. We only did amicus briefs, rendered brief courts for those lawyers who were non-lawyers who were in the room. But I started meeting with league members, talking to them, and I was like, oh my God, they're poll workers, they're election administrators. They talk to everyone in their community. These are the best plaintiffs you can get because they're very knowledgeable. And so I said, well, we're going to try something. We're going to start launching plaintiff and intervener litigation. Let's just see how it goes. And I will say, not to tout my own horn, but I had an 82% win rate while I was chief counsel. And I was very proud of that. And as chief counsel, once I became chief counsel of the league, I launched this People Power Fair Maps in a hotel room after the League of Women Voters v. Rucho case, or the Rucho v. League of Women Voters North Carolina. It was a redistricting case that I thought we had positioned perfectly. We had a situation where Democrats had gerrymandered, and we had a place where Republicans had gerrymandered. So let's put this before the court so that they don't have to choose one party. We can put it before them, and we can force them or push them to decide when gerrymandering goes too far. But they didn't take the bait. They said, nope, we're not going to do a line. We're not going to draw a line in the sand. Just let it keep going. And so after that decision, I mean, this was one of the decisions that made me cry in my office. I closed the door. But I was definitely crying on this day. But I think what was really important is that we didn't accept that as an outcome. We said, how do we get back in the game and fight? So for the first time since our 1920 founding, that campaign, we were able to volunteer all 50 states to opt into this campaign. So we had so many different things that people could do. It was civic engagement. It was changing your state constitution. It was doing federal fixes depending on where you were. But we had all 50 states moving around this one thing around the country. And we were able to pass maps in Kentucky. Our map was actually the second. I mean, it was voted down ultimately, but it was the only two that went before the legislature. That was a huge thing for us. Florida pushing back on laws that would disenfranchise people who were returning back to society. But we did a lot of work through that campaign that I'm really proud of. But I think it's because we fought, we litigated, we organized, but more importantly, we educated communities about the harm and how you pair their pain with their power. So I think we won meaningful victories, 82% of them. And the League has successfully challenged many redistricting laws. We've protected voter access, 25.2 million in 22 alone, and that number keeps growing. And we fought racial gerrymandering and political gerrymandering. And we helped protect just so many voters during 2022 as well as 2024. So I think that work really matters right now. We have to remind ourselves that there are wins even amongst the chaos, because right now it feels a lot of chaos. And so one of the things I try to remember and try to impart to people is that democracy is not self-sustaining. It requires participation, it requires protection, and it has to be people who are willing to still fight for it in this moment. Now, I often say something that makes people sometimes a little uncomfortable, and it's the idea that authoritarianism does not always arrive dramatically, especially when things are in chaos. It happens very quietly, piece by piece, and things like exhaustion, cynicism, disinformation, even people deciding that their voice does not matter. We saw a huge decline in young people who said, my voice just doesn't matter. That is a part of the authoritarian playbook. And that's why civic engagement matters so deeply in this moment. Not because democracy is perfect, but because disengagement creates more openings for harm. And so when we think about why we launched 8.5, the Unite and Rise, it's because this initiative was built around a very simple but powerful idea. History shows, not just in the United States, but globally, that when 3.5% of a population engages in nonviolent civic engagement and participation, that you can overturn authoritarian regimes. That's a really powerful thing, because it means that we don't need everybody. It just means that we need a small few who are willing to do something. And so for us, that means mobilizing 8.5 million voters. We're right at around 4 million right now. And so between now and November, we are working our tails off to get the other 4.5 million. And we're going after those 90 million people who do not show up in 2024. Because those are the people who have to show up and vote for pro-democracy reform in order for us to change this country. And it's important to me to make sure that we're not rooting this work in fear, which is so rampant right now, that we have to ground it in hope and research, because the League does nothing, we do a lot of research on all the things. Because despite what happens around us, I still believe deeply in people. I believe in collective participation, I believe in civic participation, and I believe in the ability to have a multiracial, inclusive democracy still in the United States. And I believe ordinary people remain the greatest force for change that this country has ever known. And that belief is what keeps me going. We were talking about redistricting earlier, and one of the things, with this extreme gerrymandering is there's maps being drawn all over the country, cutting these people out, cutting those people out. But when we think about redistricting, and I've done it for a little over 22 years now, is that it's math. It's a math equation. So when you think about more people showing up than what they expected, because they're using the numbers from 2020 and 2022 to draw these lines. But when more people than what showed up in 22 and 2024, it breaks the math. And we have to keep that in mind, that this is just math. So let me talk about a few of the women who came before us. Women who organized, women who were told, be quiet, women who were marched when it was dangerous and when it was unsafe. Women who built institutions even when they were excluded from others. And they understood something really powerful. Democracy is not inherited automatically. Every generation must actively decide to protect it. And now that responsibility belongs to each and every one of us in this room, especially in this moment when things are chaotic and it feels like hope is being lost. So when people ask me what gives me hope, I go back to people do, women in rooms like this do, the men allies in this room do, allies to pro-democracy always do, young people do, organizers do, lawyers, attorneys, they do, community leaders do. Everyday people who decide that they are going to show up, not just now, but in November and beyond. Because every movement in American history began when ordinary people decided that they were no longer going to sit on the sidelines of democracy. This is how change has always happened, not only in our country, but in so many countries around the world. So before I close, I want to ask you to do something with me, and it's kind of shishi-poo-poo, so just go with me. If you're comfortable, close your eyes or soften your gaze, whatever you're comfortable with. I want to paint a picture of a world I think that we are still capable of building. And as I talk about this, you may have moments where your body wants to resist. It's like, no, that's not possible. We're too far. But just lean in for me for just 45 seconds. Picture a country where the people you love most have what they need, not merely to survive, but to thrive. A safe place to live, enough food in the refrigerator, enough money for gas, medication, childcare, and a good night's sleep peacefully. Picture women like us and our allies, we're mostly lawyers in this room, but also sisters, mothers, daughters, aunties, mentors, caretakers, moving through a nation that reflects our values. A nation where our invisible labor is respected, where our brilliance is not questioned, where our children inherit freedom, not fear. Picture neighborhoods where kindness is ordinary. People drop apple pies off at your door and you're not suspect. Where truth is taught, where the law is a shield for the vulnerable, not a weapon for the powerful. Where you do not have to carve out time for the people we love because our lives are not organized around consistent crisis. Now picture Election Day in that world. First and foremost, it's a holiday. People are not confused, intimidated, or pushed aside. They show up informed. They show up proud, knowing that they were going to cast their ballot and their vote will count. Voting rights are protected and expanded. Democratic institutions are defended and not hollowed out. And when leaders fail the public does not shrink back. The public organizes, shows up, speaks clearly, and is heard by their representatives. Communities are safer and more connected. Children learn the full truth about this history and still have reason to love it enough to improve it and do better. Families can buy groceries without that quiet panic in the checkout line that it may not go through. People feel not only exhausted by history, but they feel responsible for it. Now, how do you feel? Was any of that hard to hear, accept, or envision? Okay, open your eyes, please. You can stay asleep if you want to, that's fine. But let's be clear, this is not naive. This is not a fantasy. This actually exists in other parts of the world. Think about Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, the happiest places on earth, right? That is where things like this actually occur. Every day people feel this way, moving through their life. But none of us gets to admire that vision from a distance. We have to build it and we have to start now. So here's the charge that I'm leaving with everyone in this room today. Reach 5 people. Not someday, this week. 5 people in your phone, 5 people in your family, 5 people in your firm, your church, your block, your circle. Tell them to make a plan to vote. More than half the country will have primaries between now and the end of June. 24 states. The time is now. That is how movements grow. That is how turnout grows, by each of us just doing 5. All of us have 5 people in our network. All of us. And let me say this plainly. In times like this, civic participation is not a hobby. It ain't extra credit. It's the moral obligation that we all have to save not only this world, but our families and ourselves. Because we know that what's at stake for not only ourselves, but our sisters, our parents, our children, our elders, our communities, that silence right now is not neutrality. Silence is surrender in this moment. We know how to prepare a case, many of us in this room. We know how to marshal the facts. We know how to advocate when rights are on the line. But right now, we must bring that same discipline that we have in our work, the same fire and the same love for the work that we have to reach people, help people, and support people in our work. And it has to translate to how we show up at the ballot box, not only between now and whenever your primary is. When is the primary? Did it already happen?
September.
Yes. So between now and November. What this moment requires is for us to have courage. It's not going to be easy. There are going to be some of those 5 people are going to be like, don't talk to me about politics. I don't care. All the things we have to push through. Consistency is what matters. Stamina. It's going to take stamina, y'all, for some of these folks at the Thanksgiving table, but that's going to be too late. We have to have faith in one another, and we have to have the audacity to believe that ordinary people organized with a purpose, a shared purpose, that we can still save this country from the inside out. So let us leave here with more than inspiration, but an assignment. We have the power of 5 for midterms, which I'm assigning to each of you, and I'm doing it as well. And then make sure that you tell people to pay it forward. You're my 5, we're your 5. That is how we make sure that we have the country that we want after November. When each of us takes responsibility for our small circle, we create an unbreakable chain of participation powerful enough to protect our democracy, our communities, one another, and ourselves. This is how we save our world. This is how we save ourselves. Thank you. Miel has just given me so many. Does anyone have questions? Okay.
How did you join the league?
How did I join the league?
Yeah.
They recruited me.
No, I'm saying how did we join the league?
Oh, join the league. Yes. Okay, there should be, yes. This on the screen. So you can use this to join the Unite and Rise. You can also become a member. We have in the last year about 20,000 new members, and we are growing, so come join the movement. We are hyper-local, so if you want to do something in your community, small acts of democracy, not saving the whole legislature, small things that you can do in your community every day to get us between now and November and beyond. So please use the code, become a member, join us in the fight, because right now I believe that, no offense, men, close your ears. Y'all have had a long time to do what you're doing in this country. It's time to learn the same country. Any other questions?
Thank you so much for your presentation. Jerry, what do you think is the solution? It's on steroids. It's on steroids now.
I will just say that when this happened, we called it the redistricting wars last summer. I told people, I said, the math is not mathing. If everyone decides to gerrymander, it's going to be millions and millions of people, women, people of color, who are going to get district out. And so that's why I say it is a math problem. And I say that because I have drawn maps in Georgia and Michigan and Maryland, et cetera. When the math changes, when more people show up than what they counted on to draw the maps, that's the only thing that breaks the math. And so telling people that they need to show up in record numbers, that's why I'm saying 5 people. We only need, like I said, 3.5%. That's 8 million people. That's only a tenth of the people who did not show up in 2024. 90 million, we just need 10, a talented tenth to show up. But that is how we move this country forward. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I know the league is nonpartisan, so I'll
We
try to
are.
frame this as nonpartisan I can. If you wanted to pick 5 people in a state where you wanted to see 5 more people show up, what are the 5 states you would pick for us to call?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love this. I can answer this. I think Texas is going to be really important. I think Pennsylvania is going to be really important. I think Arizona is going to be really important. I'm curious about California with the governor's race and things like that. But California could become an unusual player. And Florida.
I love Florida.
Florida. But people, if you all have seen, I don't know if people are on TikTok or Instagram, but there are young people out in these streets right now. There are people who are really feeling the anger of this moment. And I think that that is legitimate. I feel it too, but we've got to tell them how to change the world that is around them. And that means showing up to the ballot box, because this could very well be the last election that is a real election to vote in.
That actually very nicely. So I work with academics across the country who are really passionate about the civic role of higher education. And what I'm hearing from them is something that you actually mentioned, which is that young voters feel incredibly disengaged. And like their voice doesn't matter, like they feel very fatalistic about current state of things. And especially not resonating with them is the idea of defending or fighting for democracy.
Right.
So the best that I've been able to counsel them is that you have to explain what you mean by democracy, but I'm curious if you've come across any type of messaging around that that resonates with people, especially young people who feel so disengaged from the whole thing.
I don't talk to young people about democracy. Democracy, asking about democracy is like asking about church. Like, what's the church? And they're like, I don't know. What I think is what's been very helpful for me talking with young people, because for 2024 we went around to all these colleges in Nevada, in Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio to talk to young people. You can't start out with democracy. What you have to start out with is what their pain point is. So I'd say, what is pissing you off right now? And what I heard most was, I can't afford a place to live. Housing was a big thing that kept coming up. And I said, well, do you know who in your state decides what the prices are? Vote that mug out if you're not happy. He's on your ballot. She's on your ballot. So talking to them about what their pain point is, whether it's housing, whether it's paying back student loans, whether it's access to groceries or fresh food, because a lot of people don't have grocery stores in their neighborhood. I talk to them about what they're pissed off about and who is the person in their state who has the power to change.
That question also has to do with a little older, but still younger than I, 30 and 40-year-olds who feel that the choices between the 2 primary political parties are not things that they really want to perpetuate. One is, the age of leadership in those parties, and feeling that there isn't a way to change that. How do you address that and encourage them? They'll still vote maybe, but it's hard for them to sort of swallow that forward.
Well, let me ask you a question. Who in here, during the time that you've been voting, however long that's been, has found a perfect candidate? They just perfect. I don't see nobody raise. Let me give you another 10 seconds. I know some people say Hillary, Barack. I'm Mr. Obama. There is no such thing as a perfect candidate. And I think that's important for people to understand. We've always had to choose the best candidate who's going to represent our values. But what I do know is that many people, and I feel sad about this, that many people heard rhetoric in 2024 and voted for something without fully understanding the ramifications of their everyday life. We have seen, and I don't want to trigger anybody, but we have seen the second coming of slavery in this country with people, Hispanic folks being ripped off streets, immigrants ripped off streets and taken to places that they have no origin to. That is how slavery happened. And we are seeing it in our country right now. And so I think we have to have the conversations. We have to have the discourse. We don't all need to agree. That is not what democracy is about. It's about disagreeing and still being able to be friends and shake hands afterwards. Or even if you don't want to shake hands, be like, okay, I'm not going to try to do anything to harm you. But I think that it's important to talk about the fact that there are no perfect candidates. We've always had to make tough choices. But also, who is the candidate that best reflects who you are, and making and normalizing disagreement, because that is how we have always survived. When I think about how the Voting Rights Act happened, I was talking to Lucy Baines Johnson earlier this week. Lyndon B. Johnson's daughter. And she was in the photo when he signed, the VRA. And she talked about when he signed the Civil Rights Act that she was 17 years old. She had no idea. She was like, why do I have to be here? And then he made her come to the floor when he signed the Voting Rights Act. She was like, why do I have to be here? And he said to her, you may not recognize the gravity of this moment right now, but many years from now you will, and you will appreciate that I had you witness what this is. And so that's a really powerful story to me, because I think that we don't always recognize the moment that we're in. Right now, we are writing history. This is going to be in history books forever, what we are going through in this moment, because we have backslidden so much. And so how we show up in this moment, and it's not just to get on a page in the history book, even though you should have a good photo when you do that. You want to be on the right side of things, right? You want to just know that, and that's why it's so important for me to lead the league in this moment. I want to make sure we're on the right side of this in this moment. I don't want to be on the sidelines thinking about whether or not we should engage. We are engaging, and we are standing for the people who are targeted most in this moment. And we are not hesitating. We're doing it unapologetically. How much time do I have, Mia? 5 minutes.
If anyone has questions.
No more questions? Well, thank you all so much.